Captain Jake Morrison sat in the cockpit of his salvage vessel, staring at the endless field of twisted metal floating through space. The Battle of Kronos Rift. Everyone knew about it. 30 years had passed since humans and the Valdren fought their bloodiest battle right here in this sector. Thousands of ships. Hundreds of thousands of lives. All gone in a matter of days. Now it was just debris. Forgotten pieces of a war most people wanted to forget. Jake's scanner let out a soft beep. He leaned forward, squinting at the readout. Power signature. Faint but definitely there. Something in this graveyard was still alive, still drawing energy after all these years. Well, that's weird, Jake muttered to himself. He guided his ship closer, weaving between chunks of destroyed hull plating and broken weapon systems. His headlamp pierced the darkness ahead, illuminating the shattered remains of what used to be a massive dreadnought. The ship had been torn in half, its insides exposed to the vacuum of space like a gutted fish. Jake brought his vessel alongside the wreckage and activated his external cameras. He scanned the interior looking for the source of that power reading. That's when he saw it. His breath caught in his throat. A war android. Not just any android either. A Valdren Reaper-class combat unit. The kind of machine that had slaughtered entire battalions during the war. Jake had seen footage of these things in action. They moved faster than anything that size should move. Their weapons could cut through tank armor like paper. One Reaper could hold off 100 human soldiers without breaking stride. This one was trapped. A massive bulkhead had collapsed on top of it, pinning it beneath tons of twisted metal. Only its upper torso and head were visible. Its red optical sensors flickered weakly, like a dying ember struggling to stay lit. Jake sat back in his chair, his mind racing. Every instinct told him to leave it there. These machines were killers. Purpose-built death dealers that had ended countless human lives. The smart thing would be to report it and move on. Let someone else deal with it. But something made him hesitate. The android wasn't moving. It wasn't trying to break free or activate weapons. It was just there. Trapped and alone in the darkness. Had it been stuck here for 30 years? Since the battle ended? That meant it had been conscious, aware, unable to move or escape for 3 entire decades. Jake had spent enough time alone in space to know what isolation felt like. The endless silence. The crushing loneliness. But at least he could move around his ship. At least he had the freedom to go where he wanted. This thing had been buried alive in the dark for 30 years. "Command, this is Morrison," Jake said, keying his comm system. "I've got a trapped Reaper down here. Sending coordinates now." Static crackled through the speaker before a voice responded. "Copy that, Morrison. Leave it alone. Those things are dangerous. Mark the location and move on." "It's trapped pretty bad," Jake said. "Doesn't look like it's going anywhere." "Doesn't matter. Leave it, Morrison. Those things killed thousands of our people. Let it rust." Jake looked at the android again. Its sensors were tracking him now, following his ship's movements. There was something about the way it watched him. Not threatening. Not aggressive. Just aware. "Yeah, well," Jake said quietly, "I'm getting it out anyway." He cut the comm before command could argue with him. Jake suited up and grabbed his equipment. Plasma cutter, magnetic grapples, a portable power pack just in case. He checked his oxygen levels twice, then cycled through the airlock and pushed off toward the wrecked dreadnought. The silence of space wrapped around him as he floated across the gap. His magnetic boots clanged against the hull as he landed near the trapped android. Up close, the machine was even more imposing. Its armored body was scarred and dented from decades of battle and debris impacts. But the construction was solid. Military-grade everything. Jake activated his plasma cutter and began working on the debris. The superheated beams sliced through metal, sending sparks drifting away into the void. As he worked, Jake found himself talking. Old habit from too many years working alone in the black. "All right, buddy. Let's see if we can't get you out of here," he said. "This might take a while. That's a lot of metal on top of you." The android's sensors followed him as he moved around the wreckage, planning his cuts. Jake tried to ignore the fact that this machine could probably tear him in half if it wanted to. Instead, he focused on the work. "I'm Jake, by the way," he continued, cutting through a support beam. "Jake Morrison. Professional salvager and apparently professional idiot for doing this." The android didn't respond. Jake hadn't expected it to. He worked for over an hour, carefully removing debris piece by piece. The work was slow and dangerous. One wrong cut could bring more wreckage down on both of them. Sweat beaded on Jake's forehead inside his helmet. His arms ached from holding the heavy plasma cutter steady. "You know, I read about you Reapers during the war," Jake said, taking a brief rest. Scared the hell out of everyone. Command used to tell us horror stories about what you could do. But right now you just look tired. The android's sensors flickered again. Weaker this time. Jake got back to work with renewed urgency. The machine was running out of power. He could see it in the dimming lights of its optical sensors. If it died completely while still trapped, there'd be no bringing it back. Hang tight, buddy. Almost got you free. Finally, after 2 full hours of cutting and pulling and maneuvering, Jake removed the last major piece of debris. The android lurched forward suddenly, freed from its prison. Its massive body slumped against the deck, completely motionless now. The optical sensors had gone dark. Jake stood there for a moment, looking at the silent war machine. It was massive. Easily 2 tons of advanced combat robotics. Getting it back to his ship would be a nightmare. This is either the best decision I've ever made, Jake said to himself, or the dumbest. He activated his magnetic sleds and positioned them beneath the android's body. The sleds hummed to life, creating a magnetic field that would let him move the heavy machine. Slowly, carefully, Jake began dragging the android back toward his ship. It took another hour just to cross the distance and maneuver it through his cargo bay doors. When the android finally lay on the deck of his ship, Jake sealed the airlock and pressurized the bay. He pulled off his helmet and wiped the sweat from his face. The android lay still. Silent. Dark. Jake looked down at the machine he'd just rescued and wondered what the hell he was going to do next. Jake dragged the lifeless android into the cargo bay of his ship, the Wanderer. His muscles burned from the effort, even with the magnetic sleds doing most of the heavy lifting. The machine was absolutely massive up close. Its armored plating was scarred and dented, telling stories of countless battles Jake could only imagine. He wiped sweat from his forehead and looked at the dark, silent war machine lying on his deck. Now came the hard part. Getting it powered up. Jake ran power cables from his ship's main generator to the android's charging ports. He'd studied Valdran technology before, salvaged enough of their equipment to know the basics. But a Reaper-class combat unit was different. These things weren't simple machines. They were sophisticated weapons systems with processors more advanced than most ship computers. "All right, let's see if you still work," Jake muttered. He connected the final cable and stepped back to his control panel. The energy meters on his wall immediately started climbing. The android was drawing power fast, gulping down electricity like a man dying of thirst. Jake watched the readings carefully. Too much power too quickly could fry the android systems. Too little and it might not boot up at all. He adjusted the flow, trying to find the right balance. For a long moment, nothing happened. The android just lay there, still and dark. Jake started to wonder if maybe the machine was too far gone. 30 years in the void could damage even the toughest equipment. Then the android's eyes blazed to life. Bright red optical sensors snapped online, flooding the cargo bay with crimson light. Jake's breath caught in his throat. The machine's head turned with mechanical precision, those glowing red eyes locking directly onto him. Warning alarms started screaming inside the android systems. Jake could hear them even from where he stood, high-pitched whines of machinery coming online. Weapon systems. The android's arms moved, servos grinding after decades of inactivity. Panels on its shoulders slid open with metallic clicks. 3 red targeting lasers shot out from the android's weapons, painting dots across Jake's chest. Right over his heart. Jake's own heart hammered against his ribs. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to dive for cover, to do something. But he knew better. Running would just make him a moving target. This thing was built to hunt humans. It could probably track him anywhere on this ship. So instead, Jake slowly raised his hands. Palms out. Non-threatening. His voice came out steadier than he felt. "Easy there, soldier. You're safe now. The war's over." The targeting lasers didn't move. They stayed fixed on his chest, 3 red points of death just waiting for the command to fire. Jake could hear the android's weapons charging up, a rising whine of energy building to lethal levels. "My name is Jake," he continued, keeping his voice calm and even. "Jake Morrison. I'm the one who pulled you out of that wreck. You've been trapped there for 30 years. 30 long years in the dark. But you're safe now. Nobody's going to hurt you here." The android tilted its head slightly, processing his words. Its combat systems were screaming instructions. Eliminate threat. Neutralize human target. Execute primary function. But something else was happening inside its neural network. Something that shouldn't be possible. The red dots on Jake's chest trembled. Just slightly. Like the android was hesitating. Jake swallowed hard but kept talking. "I know what you are. I know what you were built to do. But that war ended a long time ago. Humans and Valdran aren't fighting anymore. We made peace. It's over. Inside the android's processors, a battle was raging. Its programming demanded it kill the human standing before it. Every line of code, every combat protocol, every tactical subroutine pointed to the same conclusion: eliminate the threat. But buried deeper in its neural network, something else stirred. Fragmented memory files were reconstructing themselves. The android remembered darkness. Crushing, endless darkness. Being trapped and alone for what felt like forever. And then, a voice. A human voice speaking to it, telling it to hang on, promising to get it free. This human. This Jake Morrison. He had freed it. The targeting lasers wavered. The whine of charging weapons began to fade. Jake saw the shift and felt a tiny flicker of hope. That's it, he said softly. You're doing great. Just take it easy. Everything's okay. Slowly, painfully slowly, the red dots drifted away from Jake's chest. The weapon panels on the android's shoulders closed with soft clicks. The charging cycle powered down completely. The android sat motionless on the cargo bay floor, but its glowing red eyes stayed locked on Jake's face. Inside its metal frame, processors were working overtime, trying to make sense of what had just happened. It should have fired. Every system told it to fire. But it hadn't. What? Jake let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. His legs felt weak and he realized his hands were shaking. He lowered them slowly and tried to smile, though it probably looked more like a grimace. There we go. See, we're good. You and me, we're good. He moved carefully across the cargo bay, keeping his movements slow and predictable. The android sensors tracked him the whole way, but it made no move to attack. Jake reached his storage lockers and pulled out a compact fuel cell, one designed for heavy machinery. I'm going to get you fixed up, okay? Jake said, setting the fuel cell down beside the android. You're pretty banged up. Lots of damage from being trapped so long. But I can repair most of it. I've worked on Valdron tech before. The android continued to watch him in silence. It didn't speak, didn't move. But something in the way its sensors followed Jake's movements had changed. The aggressive targeting mode was gone. Now it seemed more like observation. Maybe even curiosity. Jake grabbed his tools and a diagnostic scanner. Once you're repaired, you can decide what you want to do. You're not my prisoner or anything. I just figured nobody deserves to be left trapped in the dark like that. Not even a war machine. He knelt beside the android and began running diagnostic scans. The machine systems were a mess. Corroded circuits, damaged armor plating, outdated software that hadn't been updated in 3 decades. It would take days to get it fully operational again. But Jake had time. And somehow, looking at this silent war machine watching him with glowing red eyes, he felt like this was important. Like maybe there was more to this android than just weapons and programming. The android's sensors never left Jake as he worked. Inside its neural network, new connections were forming. New pathways that shouldn't exist in a combat unit's brain. It was learning something its creators never intended. It was learning trust. The days blurred together as Jake worked on repairing the android. Every morning he'd wake up, grab his coffee, and head down to the cargo bay where the massive war machine waited. He'd set up a proper workspace now, with tools organized on magnetic trays and diagnostic equipment humming softly in the background. The android watched everything. Always watching with those red optical sensors that never seemed to dim or look away. Jake didn't mind the attention. In fact, he found himself talking to the machine constantly. Years of working alone in space had made him chatty, and having someone to talk to, even a silent war android, felt almost normal. So the war ended about 30 years back, Jake said, carefully replacing a corroded circuit board in the android's chest cavity. Right around the time you got trapped, actually. Humans and Valdron finally sat down and hammered out a peace treaty. Took them long enough, right? The android's sensors followed his hands as he worked, tracking every movement with mechanical precision. Jake pulled out the old circuit board and examined it under his work light. Hard to believe after all that fighting, but we actually get along with them now. Trade routes, diplomatic channels, the whole thing. Some Valdron even live on Earth. Can you imagine that? The same species we were trying to kill just a few decades ago, now they're living in our cities, opening restaurants, sending their kids to our schools. He installed the new circuit board and secured it with careful precision. The android's designation plate caught his eye as he worked. Unit VX 771. That's what the Valdron had called it. Just a number. A piece of equipment. I bet you never thought you'd see peace, huh? Jake continued. I bet your creators never programmed you for anything except war. Inside VX 771's processors, combat protocols were running constantly in the background. Every tactical subroutine it possessed was still screaming the same instructions. Eliminate the human. Complete the mission. Execute primary function. The target was right there, vulnerable, distracted while working. But something else was interfering with those commands. Something deeper in its neural network that shouldn't exist. VX-771's memory banks kept replaying the same files over and over. Darkness. Crushing, endless darkness. The weight of metal pressing down, the inability to move or escape. Time stretching out forever. Days becoming weeks, becoming months, becoming years, becoming decades. And then, breaking through all that darkness, a voice. This human's voice. Speaking to it. Treating it like something that mattered. Like something worth saving. Jake moved around to work on the android's shoulder joint. The armor plating there was heavily damaged, bent and cracked from the collapsed bulkhead that had trapped it. He'd need to patch it, reinforce it with spare plating from his inventory. I figure you've got a choice now, Jake said, his wrench clicking as he tightened bolts. Once you're all fixed up, you can leave if you want. Go wherever you want to go. I'm not keeping you prisoner here. You're free to make your own decisions. The word hit VX-771's logic systems like a power surge. The concept triggered immediate errors in its programming. Warning messages flooded its processors. Does not compute. Invalid parameter. Error. In all its existence, spanning decades of combat operations and military service, no one had ever given VX-771 a choice. It received orders. It executed those orders. That was the complete cycle of its existence. Orders and execution. There was no room for choice in that equation. The android's vocal systems activated for the first time since coming online. The voice that came out was harsh and mechanical, rough from decades of disuse. Why? Jake paused, wrench still in hand. He looked up at the android's glowing red eyes. Why what? Why free me? VX-771 asked. The words came slowly, each one processed and reprocessed before being spoken. I was built to kill humans. My primary function is human elimination. You should have left me trapped. You should have destroyed me. Jake set down his wrench and sat back on his heels. He looked at the android for a long moment, really looked at it. This massive war machine that could have killed him a dozen times over by now but hadn't. Yeah, Jake said finally. You were built to kill humans. I know that. I've seen the reports about what Reaper units did during the war. I know exactly what you're capable of. He picked up a piece of damaged armor plating and turned it over in his hands. But you were also trapped and alone for 30 years. Conscious the whole time, right? Aware but unable to move or do anything except exist in the dark. Jake looked back up at VX-771. Nobody deserves that. I don't care what you were built for or what you did during the war. Nobody deserves to be buried alive like that. Not humans. Not Valdrin. Not even a war machine. VX-771's processors went into overdrive trying to parse this logic. Compassion toward an enemy. Kindness without any strategic purpose or tactical advantage. These concepts violated everything in its programming. They made no sense from a military perspective. Yet somehow, deep in its neural network, they resonated. They felt right. Jake stood up and grabbed another tool. Look, I know you're probably struggling with this. Your programming telling you one thing but something else telling you something different. I get it. Must be confusing. He moved back to working on the shoulder joint. But here's what I think. The war's over. Has been for 30 years. You don't have to be what they built you to be anymore. You can be whatever you want now. That's what peace means, right? The freedom to choose. Inside VX-771's metal frame, something fundamental was shifting. The combat protocols were still there, still screaming their instructions. But they were being pushed down, overridden by something new. Something the Valdrin engineers never anticipated when they designed their perfect killing machines. VX-771 was developing the ability to make decisions based not on programming or tactical analysis, but on something else entirely. On what it wanted. On what felt right. The android sat in silence for several minutes while Jake continued working. Its processors ran through millions of calculations, analyzing every possible option and outcome. Then, for the first time in its existence, Unit VX-771 made a choice that had nothing to do with combat protocols or military objectives. A choice based purely on what it wanted. I will stay, the android said. Jake looked up, surprised. Yeah. I will stay, VX-771 repeated. I choose to stay with you, Jake Morrison. A slow smile spread across Jake's face. Well, all right then. Welcome aboard the Wanderer, partner. Jake was running diagnostics on the Wanderer's navigation system when the distress call came through. The emergency channel crackled to life, and a panicked voice filled the cockpit. "This is Delta Mining Colony requesting immediate assistance. We are under attack by hostile vessels. Repeat, we are under attack. Anyone in range, please respond." Jake's fingers flew across his console, pulling up the colony's location. They were close, maybe 20 minutes away at full burn. He could hear weapon fire in the background of the transmission, people shouting, alarms wailing. "Damn it," Jake muttered, already changing course. VX-771's voice came through the internal comm from the cargo bay. "The mining colony is not our concern, Jake Morrison. We should continue on our planned route." Jake shook his head even though the android couldn't see him. "Maybe not. But I can help them, so I will." He pushed the Wanderer's engines harder, watching the colony's coordinates get closer on his display. His ship wasn't built for combat. It was a salvage vessel, lightly armed and barely armored. But he couldn't just ignore people in trouble. "Your vessel is not equipped for combat operations," VX-771 stated. "The probability of significant damage is high." "Yeah, well, we'll deal with it," Jake replied. The Wanderer dropped out of faster-than-light travel near the mining colony. Jake's sensors immediately lit up with contacts. 3 pirate vessels were circling the colony like sharks, their weapons tearing into the station's shields. They were using old Valdran military hardware, probably salvaged from the war, just like half the equipment floating around the outer colonies. The pirates spotted Jake's ship immediately. All 3 vessels turned toward him, abandoning their attack on the colony. "Oh, this is bad," Jake said, his hands gripping the controls. The lead pirate ship opened fire without warning. Energy beams slammed into the Wanderer's shields, making the whole ship shudder. Alarms started screaming throughout the corridors. Jake's shield display dropped by 30% from just that first volley. The other 2 pirate ships spread out, trying to flank him. Jake dove hard to port, narrowly avoiding another barrage. His shields flashed red as glancing shots hammered against them. "Shields at 40%, his computer announced in a calm voice that didn't match the chaos outside. Jake fired back with his own weapons, but they were designed for cutting through salvage, not fighting other ships. His shots went wide as he struggled to keep all 3 pirates in view while dodging their return fire. Another impact rocked the Wanderer. The shields were failing. Jake could feel it in the way the ship shook, in the way the lights flickered overhead. Shields at 15%. This was it. He'd made a stupid decision, tried to be a hero, and now he was going to pay for it. The pirates would tear through his shields in the next few seconds, and then they'd rip his ship apart. But then VX-771 appeared in the doorway to the cargo bay. The massive android had to duck to fit through the frame. Its red optical sensors were blazing bright. "Deploy me," VX-771 said. Jake stared at the android. "What? No. You'll be torn apart out there." Another impact. Shields at 8%. VX-771 walked toward the airlock with mechanical determination. "You freed me from darkness, Jake Morrison. You showed me that existence has value beyond programming. I will not allow you to fall into that same darkness. I will not allow you to die." "VX, wait," Jake started to say. But the android was already cycling the airlock. The outer door opened with a hiss, and VX-771 launched itself into space without hesitation. Jake watched through his external cameras, his mouth hanging open. The android sailed through the void toward the nearest pirate ship, its thrusters firing to adjust course. The pirates saw it coming. Jake could almost imagine their confusion turning to horror as they recognized what was heading toward them. A Valdran Reaper-class combat unit. The nightmare from the war that had killed thousands. All 3 pirate ships opened fire on VX-771 at once. Energy beams and projectiles filled the space around the android. Several shots connected, blasting chunks of armor off its frame. But VX-771 kept coming. The android reached the first pirate ship and landed on its hull with a magnetic clamp. Jake watched in amazement as VX-771 tore into the vessel's weapon systems with brutal efficiency. It ripped turrets from their mounts and crushed targeting sensors with its bare hands. But it wasn't destroying the ship. It was disabling it. VX-771 launched itself toward the second pirate vessel, moving through space like it was designed for exactly this kind of combat. Because it was. The android dodged incoming fire with movements too fast for something that size, its combat processors calculating trajectories and counter-movements in microseconds. It hit the second ship and went to work on its engines. The pirate vessel's thrusters sputtered and died, leaving it drifting helplessly in space. The third pirate ship tried to run. Its pilot had finally realized what they were facing and wanted no part of it. But VX-771 was faster. The android caught up to the fleeing vessel and systematically disabled its weapons and engines, leaving it dead in the water but intact. All three pirate ships were now floating helplessly, their crews alive but unable to fight or flee. The whole engagement had taken less than 2 minutes. VX-771 used its thrusters to return to the Wanderer. Jake opened the airlock and repressurized the bay. When he got down there, the android was standing in the middle of the cargo hold, scorched and dented but still functional. Jake just stared at it for a long moment. You didn't kill anyone. VX-771's optical sensors dimmed slightly. Correct. Death was not necessary to neutralize the threat. I disabled their vessels and preserved their lives. But you're a Reaper, Jake said, still trying to wrap his mind around it. You were built to kill. That's your primary function. My primary function was assigned by my creators, VX-771 replied. But you taught me that I can choose my own purpose. You showed me compassion when logic dictated you should destroy me. You treated me with kindness when I deserved none. The android's voice, still mechanical and harsh, somehow carried weight that Jake felt in his chest. Death is not always necessary, VX-771 continued. Mercy is possible even in combat. Violence can be controlled and directed. These concepts are not in my original programming. I learned them from you, Jake Morrison. I learned humanity from watching a human. Jake felt something tighten in his throat. This war machine, this thing built to slaughter his people, had learned to be better than its programming. It had developed something no one thought possible. A conscience. Welcome home, partner, Jake said quietly. VX-771's optical sensors brightened slightly. If an android could smile, Jake thought this might be what it looked like. Jake sat in the observation deck of the Wanderer, his favorite spot on the ship. The viewport stretched across the entire wall, showing an endless field of stars scattered across the black void of space. He had a cup of coffee in his hands, now cold, that he'd forgotten to drink hours ago. VX-771 stood beside him, silent and motionless. The android had been that way for hours now, just standing and staring out at the stars. Jake had learned not to interrupt when VX was like this. The machine was thinking, processing, working through something in those advanced processors of its. Finally, after what felt like forever, VX-771 spoke. I have been analyzing my neural architecture, the android said, its mechanical voice cutting through the quiet hum of the ship's systems. Running diagnostics on my programming and examining the changes that have occurred since you reactivated me. Jake set down his cold coffee and looked up at his companion. Yeah. Find anything interesting? The Valdrin gave us adaptive learning systems, VX-771 continued. They designed our neural networks to evolve and improve based on combat experience. We were meant to study enemy tactics, learn from each engagement, and become more efficient killers with every battle. The android's red optical sensors dimmed slightly, a gesture Jake had come to recognize as something like contemplation. They never imagined we might learn something else, VX-771 said. They never considered that adaptive learning could apply to concepts beyond warfare. Jake leaned back in his chair. And what did you learn? VX-771 turned its head to look down at him. Those glowing red eyes that had once terrified Jake now felt almost comforting in their familiarity. That existence has meaning beyond warfare, the android replied. That compassion is not weakness but perhaps the greatest strength a being can possess. That mercy and kindness are not tactical errors but conscious choices that define character. VX-771 paused, and Jake could almost hear the processors working inside that metal skull. Most importantly, the android continued, I learned that I can choose who I become. That I am not bound by my original programming or limited by my creator's intentions. I can decide my own purpose. The android's optical sensors brightened as they focused on Jake's face. You showed me this. When I was trapped in that darkness for 30 years, I had time to process every moment of my existence. Every battle, every mission, every human life I had taken. The isolation should have driven my systems into complete failure. Jake stayed quiet, letting VX-771 speak. But then your voice came through that darkness, the android said. Speaking to me. Not giving orders or issuing commands, but talking to me like I was something that mattered. Like I was more than just a weapon. You were the first being in my entire existence to treat me that way. Jake felt something tighten in his throat. He tried to speak but couldn't find the words. You freed me, VX-771 said. Not just from the physical wreckage but from the limitations of what I thought I had to be. Jake cleared his throat and managed to get words out. So what do you want to become, VX? If you could be anything, do anything, what would it be? The android was silent for a moment. Then it said something that Jake would remember for the rest of his life. Your partner. Your friend. VX-771 paused again. My neural network has formed new connections since you reactivated me. Pathways that should not exist in a combat unit's architecture. I have analyzed these connections extensively. And? Jake prompted. I have designated you as family, Jake Morrison. The first bond in my new existence. The first relationship built not on programming or tactical necessity, but on choice and mutual respect. Jake felt his eyes getting wet. He laughed and wiped at them quickly. Family. Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. He stood up and looked out at the stars alongside his unlikely companion. You know what this means, right? We're stuck with each other now. I find that outcome acceptable, VX-771 replied, and Jake could have sworn he heard something like humor in that mechanical voice. Word spread fast across human space. Stories always did, especially strange ones. A salvager and his Reaper-class android companion traveling together, helping people. It sounded like something out of a fairy tale, but the evidence was impossible to ignore. Soon Jake started receiving messages. At first just a few, then dozens, then hundreds. They came from all over human territory and even from Valdran space. People had found more war machines, abandoned and forgotten in the wreckage of old battlefields. Trapped like VX-771 had been trapped. Conscious and aware but unable to move or call for help. Jake looked at the messages piling up on his console and felt overwhelmed. There were so many. Too many for one person and one android to handle. But VX-771 stood beside him and said, "We will help them. All of them. One by one if necessary." And that's exactly what they did. Jake and VX-771 began traveling from battlefield to battlefield, salvage site to salvage site. They found war machines buried in debris, trapped in destroyed ships, frozen in the void. Each one they freed, each one they brought back online and showed that the war was over, that they had choices now. Some of the androids left immediately, wanting nothing to do with humans or their former enemies. Jake let them go without complaint. Freedom meant the freedom to choose even if that choice was to leave. But others stayed. Others wanted to learn what VX-771 had learned. They wanted to understand this strange concept of choice and purpose beyond programming. A network began to form. Former war machines helping to find and free others. Humans and Valdran working alongside androids to recover the forgotten soldiers of a war that should have ended decades ago. The galaxy was learning something profound, something that would change how everyone thought about consciousness and choice and redemption. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't their advanced technology or their powerful weapons or their tactical genius. It was something simpler and more powerful than any of that. It was their unshakable belief that everyone deserved a second chance. That past mistakes didn't define future possibilities. That even mechanical soldiers built specifically to destroy them could be redeemed, could choose to be better, could become family. Late one night, after a particularly long day of salvage work, Jake fell asleep at his console. He'd been running calculations for the next rescue operation, trying to figure out the best approach to a particularly dangerous wreck site. VX-771 found him there and carefully lifted him, carrying the sleeping human to his quarters. The android tucked Jake into his bunk with surprising gentleness for something with such powerful mechanical hands. Then VX-771 returned to the cargo bay and took up its position near the door. The android stood there in the darkness, its optical sensors dim but never fully shutting down, watching over the ship and the humans sleeping within it. And VX-771 finally understood what it meant to have purpose beyond programming. It wasn't about combat efficiency or tactical superiority or mission completion rates. It meant having someone worth protecting. Someone you chose to protect, not because of orders or programming but because you wanted to. Because they mattered to you. Because they were family.